So I already talked about certain types of callbacks that are going to be okay, right? Like we got audio call, or not audio, we got software kind of license checks, just basic software updates. So there's tons of ways that we can make things call back, and you're probably not going to make a judge freak out about that. And that's really what we're looking for, is how do we make it in such a way that it's not going to freak someone out? Now, the other question is, how exactly could all of this go wrong? Well, there's a number of ways that this can go wrong. Mistakes are unintended consequences. Putting malware up in an environment that it's easily accessible. So here's an example story, once again, kind of sharing my mistakes with y'all so you don't make those same mistakes. We had a customer a number of years ago that they wanted us to try to create a web element that would track an attacker that was breaking into their website or trying to break into their website. And we gave them the code and we said, hey, use robots.txt and say disallow no index, no follow this particular directory. And then the attacker would go to that directory and normal users wouldn't. And with robots.txt, there's just places on your website that you don't want Google to index it. So you can kind of tell these legitimate browser crawlers not to do that, right? So Googlebot and MSN bot, so on, Bing bot, don't go there. And good crawlers won't. An attacker will absolutely go there. So we sent this to the customer, and unfortunately for us, the customer immediately took that code and they put it up on the main page of their website, where every single user that came to that website was basically triggering it like hundreds and hundreds of times. That's a mistake. You have to make sure that you don't make those types of mistakes as well. So watch out for that. Full attacks against an attacker's IP address. Don't do that either. When we first released the book on cyber deception and hacking back, we got a call from somebody at Wired, and one of the authors of articles or one of the reporters at Wired was like, oh, well, you're talking about hacking back and doing these things. I'm like, well, technically, that's not at all what we're doing. We're not selling the idea of hacking back. We talk about poison and venom, and they interrupted and they were like, wait. You're telling me that you're not actually hacking the attacker's computers? Like, well, no, because that's illegal, and then we would be hackers. And this particular reporter said, well, nobody's going to find that interesting, and ended the interview right there, because they wanted it to rise to that level of full-on hacking back, because that would be interesting, right? That would just be, that's exactly what we have to do, right? That sounds like really, really cool, but it's not. Because many times that attacker's IP address is not necessarily owned by the attacker. It's not like they went out and registered that computer. Oh, DigitalOcean, yes, here's my hacker credit card and my hacker email address to register this. That's not how they do things. They take over other people's computer systems. Crashing computer systems. This is something that we're always worried about. There's actually eHippies Coalition and Connexent case from 1999 where Connexent reflected a denial of service attack back to the eHippies web server, and no charges were brought against them. But honestly, I wouldn't recommend that at all. Persistent long-term access. That can definitely get you into trouble because you're crossing the line in the Susan Clements Jeffries case. You're no longer just getting IP address and geolocation information in an effort to track a computer system down. You're now flat out hacking that computer system without permission. And you really can't be an attacker breaking into an attacker's computer and not breaking the law. So we want to say that this is ultimately about a number of different options that you have to work with. Annoyance is trying to increase the amount of work effort an attacker has to go through to break into your computer system. That's just making their life miserable. That's the cyber deception aspect of it. Attribution is where we're trying to identify exactly where those attackers are. And then ultimately attack is where we're getting access to someone's computer. And then to do that, we want to make sure that you get a warrant. So hallmarks of legality, this came from Ben Wright. Ben Wright was with us at Awareness Con, and it was absolutely fantastic to have him there. Ben is a fellow SANS instructor. I've taught with him for years, and he got really interested in this whole cyber deception thing a while ago. And what ultimately happened is he sat down with me and we started talking about the whole cyber deception thing. And he said, okay, here are the things that are absolutely important for you to keep in mind anytime you talk about cyber deception for companies. So first and foremost, you want to discuss what you're doing. You want to make sure you're discussing what you're going to do. You just don't want to do it in the dead of night. You want to document what you're doing. You want to document the activities that you're going to do and plan what you're doing. Consult with others. This means getting outside of your organization, attending things like this class as well would fall into this consult with others. The big thing that you don't want to do is you do not want to hide what it is that you are doing. Because when the courts are looking at something that's brand new, one of the things that they'll do is they'll assess the defendant's actions and how the defendant was behaving. And if you're sneaking around and you're hiding things from people, then that shows that what you are doing, at least what you think, is something that you knew was wrong. And that can absolutely have an impact on how the judge and the courts look at your actions. I would also say don't be evil. This means don't break into an attacker's computer system and start taking pictures of the attacker and then going through and getting their browser history. Don't be evil. Just because you think that you are the good person in this situation does not mean that you are, right? So let's talk about poison versus venom, right? So in this class, we're going to be discussing poison, not Brett Michaels, but poison, right? The idea that something that you have, that you create, the attacker has to break into your environment, and then they have to take that thing, they have to steal that thing from your organization. And then when they take that thing back, and then they try to execute that thing, something happens and needs to be taken. I want you to think of poisonous frogs, poisonous plants, right? The attacker has to steal things, and then it triggers itself. Now, venom and strikeback is also in this category as well. So with venom and strikeback, that's where we're actually trying to attack an attacker's IP address directly. This is a strike, a venomous snake. They're going to strike out. This is against the law unless you have a full executed warrant to actually do these activities. So I strongly discourage anybody ever at all from doing full strikeback or venomous level attacks against an IP address. We don't want to be in a situation of being an attacker as well. Now, once again, in the commercial class, we go into a lot more detail and we cover a larger number of laws that are out there. In fact, I go through the full ACDC law, the Cyber Defense Certainty Act that is out there as well. So let's move on and let's talk about annoyance. Now, the goal and objective of annoyance is to basically increase the work effort that an attacker has to go through to successfully break into your environment. Now, one of the things that's really frustrating with that is many organizations, whenever they think about cyber deception, they ultimately go straight to honeypots. And honeypots were the rage a long time ago of creating operating systems that are hackable and then allowing that attacker to try to break into your honeypot. And that's still kind of cool, but it's not really the full thrust of everything that we're going to talk about here. There's a number of different things that you can do that do not fall into the category of full honeypots, right? We have a number of different vendors out there. We have like Javelin Networks, we have Symmetria, we have Elusive, we have Ativo, we have TrapX. And as I mentioned, it's really frustrating that so many of the vendors, and not all of them, look exclusively at how can we create a virtual machine Windows system and say, well, we put up a Windows 2000 honeypot and they hacked it. Well, if you're using honeypots in that fashion, you're literally only going to learn that an attacker can take over a Windows 2000 box relatively easily. So we need to try to be a little bit better on how we do it. So I'm going to start by giving you some free things that you can do in your environment that are dead simple, that are going to have immediate benefits against your next pen tester or against the next attacker that tries to break into your organization. And it doesn't cost lots of money to do it either. So we're going to get this going because one of the things that is important when you're talking to management and you're discussing how we should approach this is you need to prove that there's value in it. And if you're talking about cyber deception, many times we're like, well, I don't see much value in using a honeypot. A honeypot can be a tremendous time sink. We need to try to make sure that we're just going to focus on the standard defenses before we get too crazy. All right, whatever. But if you can show out of the gate that there are some immediate amazing benefits to actually doing cyber deception in your organization, well, then you can win very quickly. So the goal whenever I first set this up in a webcast a while ago is I wanted to set up using Active Directory, creating a Honey account that would trigger an alert anytime someone accessed that particular account in Active Directory. It had to be very quick, it had to be very easy to do, and more importantly, it had to do something that a commercial third-party product would do. So there's a product out there called Javelin that was bought by Symantec, I believe. I'll come back to them here in a little bit. And they have a product that will create fake user accounts and fake machine accounts in your Active Directory, and they use artificial intelligence to do this. Now, the artificial intelligence is a bit hard to stomach because basically the only thing the artificial intelligence algorithm does is it learns your naming conventions for user IDs and your machine naming conventions, and it just creates more machines and user IDs using those conventions, which you can literally do on your own. So we want to do something that you can do quick, you can do easy with very little cost to your organization. We're going to call this Active Directory and Honey Admin. So let's jump in. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to create an account on your Active Directory environment that is going to be enticing. Now, there's a couple of layers on how you can do this. Personally, I'd recommend actually creating a domain administrator account using this name. Now, stick with me for just a little bit as I come into this account as well. So when you're looking at this particular account, you can create a domain admin, or you can just name it with like an admin type name, but it has to be somewhat enticing, okay? So we need to make sure that we have like a first name of admin, initials ADM, last name is administrator. So it's really on the nose, right? So it's like admin ADM administrator. Like that's just, no one is going to miss that one. It's just this huge spotlight account that anybody that sees it is gonna freak out and say, well, there's an administrator account. How do you know? Well, it says administrator in the name. Now, I sometimes talk with people and they say, well, you can't be too obvious. The attackers will think it's a trap. So a funny story about that. Derek Banks, one of the testers at Black Hills Information Security, was doing an assessment against a company. And what happened was the test that he was on, he found an administrator account. It wasn't named like administrator or admin or anything like that. It was just an account that was an administrator account. And he successfully broke into it. And it had a password of like password 1234, like a stupid password, right? And Derek calls me up and he's like, dude, I've got a problem. I'm like, what's up? He goes, well, I'm on this pen test. I saw this account and I logged into this account with a stupid password. I'm like, that is a stupid password. He's like, I know, right? And it's a domain administrator. I'm like, that's really bad. He goes, I think it's a Honey account. Like it could be, but it's a full domain admin. He's like, yes, it is. I'm like, move quick before they make it go away. So he was doing as much as he could post-exploitation with that account to maintain persistent access with the account. It was like manna from heaven, but it was so obvious and it was so easy that it was almost impossible for him to think that it wasn't a honeypot account. So he was successful with the pen test, and on the report, he's doing the debrief for the customer, and the customer was like, ha, you got our honeypot account. And Derek's like, well, did you guys detect it? No. Did you know it was an active account? They're like, oh, no. Then it wasn't a honeypot account. It was literally a vulnerability in their environment. So you have to be careful about how you set up this account so it doesn't burn you. So one of the things that you can do is you actually put in the login hours for the admin ADM administrator account on when they can log in, so they can never log in. You disable all the login hours for this particular account, so there's no way anybody can ever log into this account. You don't want to set it to disabled. You just want to make sure that the login hours are set to nothing. By the way, a step that I should have added in, log in to this account first, then disable the login hours, because there's a number of tools and scripts out there that have the ability to basically identify accounts and when they were last logged into. And if they see January 1st, 1601 or 1970, 1972 for epoch time, it means that account has never been logged into. So you need to log into the account at least once, right? So basically then block out its logon hours. And I would recommend, let's give it a good long password. Let's give it a password that's like, I don't know, let's just set it up with a 100-character password of randomized gibberish characters. No special characters because they'll create issues, but just make it so no one can log into it. Password is next to impossible to crack, and you're going to be sitting pretty good. Now, in the webcast, I did this all live. I just set up Snare to get the event logs off the server, set up Kiwi so people could grab the event logs, and then I sat down and I ran a tool that was created by Daft Hack. We actually have Bo on this webcast, and he's helping people out, and he's answering questions, which is really, really, really super cool. And the cool thing about this, and somebody had mentioned that they created a Honey account and their pen testing team wasn't interested in it. Now, I would argue that your pen testing team probably didn't do a very good job. And this is usually about the point where somebody on Discord says, it was Black Hills Information Security that didn't detect our account. We'll have to have a longer question with that, but that's funny if that's the case. So the reason why it doesn't matter is there's tools out there that will automatically pull down a full listing of all the users in your domain, and then they're going to password spray every single one of those users. So you would have like a password of like spring 2017, spring 2020, whatever it is, right? So you want to make sure that you basically have that account somewhere in Active Directory. And the attacker, honestly, is just going to run an automated tool that's going to do a password spray against every account, regardless of whether or not it's your account or not. It's going to try to hit every single one of them. So what you do is you create a rule in your SIM that if anything or anybody ever tries to authenticate to that specific account, it's going to generate an alert. And here I have an alert that you can see that somebody tried to log in with the admin account, and you're now able to identify that system. This is quick and easy, folks. Like, you sit down with your domain administrators and you say, I want to create an account. I want to disable the logon hours. I want to give it a long password, and I want to sit and wait and see if anybody ever logs into that account during the next pen test for an assumed compromise assessment on a workstation. Yeah, you're going to be able to detect that very easily, okay? So that's a super easy technique for trying to identify and stop attackers. And this doesn't cost you anything. Once again, it doesn't cost you a dime to do. So now let's talk about creating some annoyance, and let's talk a little bit about honeyports. So what we're going to do now, we're going to move off of Active Directory, and we're now going to talk about how we can actually detect like network level attacks. But before we do that, one of the tools that we talk about in the full class is the CRED Defense Toolkit. And I'm going to give you all the link to the CRED Defense Toolkit blog. So there's a bunch of really cool cyber defense and attribution things that were built into the CRED Defense Toolkit. So check that out. But this is something that we actually talk about in the full 2-day class, where we can enforce a better password filter on your systems. But there's other things that are built in to like stopping Kerberos style attacks as well. And I'm going to show you an output of a tool that detects Kerberos attacks. And then here is the GitHub for it as well. So just a really cool tool to try to make attackers' lives miserable, and another tool that we go into some more detail in as well. All right, so now let's move off of Active Directory and let's jump into how we can actually do network level cyber deception with tools like port spoof or port blocking, creating a honeyport on an environment as well. So for this, we're going to be using ADHD3. We're going to be using the ADHD VM. The password is ADHD. And we're going to start by using port spoof under annoyance. So annoyance, port spoof. So the directions for doing this are on the desktop of ADHD. So let's spend a couple of moments and let's talk about how this actually came about. Now, whenever we were doing this years ago when we first got started, I actually had a friend of mine that had a weird situation. What happened was one of the C-Os, it was actually the CEO that just came into the organization, said that they had 2 network operation centers and asked a question. Why do we have 2 network operation centers? I guess I should do this in a pirate voice. Arr, why do we have 2 network operation centers? It seems like a waste of money to me. And of course, the IT team tried to sit down and have a conversation and say, okay, when you have a network like us and your high availability like us, it's a good idea to have 2 network operation centers. And the CEO was having none of it, whatsoever. So what happened was the CEO wanted to have tryouts to figure out which one of the network operations centers was going to be the sole network operations center across the land. That was going to be it. They hired a pen testing firm. And it wasn't BHIS, it was one of the big 5 consulting firms. And the pen testing firm was going to do an assessment of both of the network operation centers. And the one that had the best security was the one that would win, because they believed through an audit that was the best way to tell. By the way, there's nothing about this that's a good idea, not even remotely a little bit. So there's going to be an East Coast versus West Coast network operation fight. It was going to turn Nebraska into a wasteland. They were lining up Tupac when he was still alive, and they were lining up Biggie, and it was going to get ugly, right, folks? It was going to be bad. So my friend who was in the West Coast Network Operations Center contacted me and said, oh, look, we have this coming up. Do you have any tricks that we can use in our organization that will actually really mess with the pen testers? And I was like, I can think of one right off the bat. We're going to go through that really, really quickly. Now, I actually have, if we go to ADHD, we actually have a command line version of this as well. So if I become root, I actually have a honeyport.sh script, which I'm scared to show because Bill Stearns is here. And he'll look at it and he'll be like, well, wait a minute, you can do this much better. And he's probably right. But if you want, it's in the root directory of ADHD. But you can actually do this just with the command line using bash. And this is one of the labs that we have in the full class as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to use port spoof to do the exact same thing. Now, the idea of port spoof and what we're going to do here is really, oops, I don't want to do port spoof. I'm going to start with honeyports. We're going to start with honeyports. There we go. We're going to come back to port spoof here in a second. So the idea of creating a honeyport on your system is basically to create a trap that as soon as an attacker tries to access that port, it will automatically block that attacker from accessing the computer system at all. Now, the reason why I talk about this, and we talk about it with the IP tables rule and using netcat, is there's a very common complaint about using this type of technique that is wrong. People will say, well, if somebody was able to hit that system and they're able to hit that system and just spoof the IP address, they can spoof the IP address and it'll automatically crash your computer network. No, that's not true. Because one of the characteristics of a good honeyport is it is only triggered in the event of a full established TCP/IP connection. Okay? It is only going to be established in the event of a fully established TCP/IP connection to that computer. So let me show you what that looks like. So if I was going to run honeyport.sh, so honeyports is now activated. And then I'm able to actually run an nmap scan against that system. And I'm specifically going to use a SYN scan. So I'm going to become root, and I'm going to do nmap, and I'm going to just do 127.0.0.1. It's going to go ahead and it's going to scan that, and we're going to see our port is open. What was the port I actually set it to? So uh, 1025. All right, good. So you can see 1025 is open. And you can see that that port shows up in my port scan, and I can rescan it again and again and again. In fact, I could just put in the specific port itself and run it again and again and again and again, and life is good. All right, so that's just doing a SYN scan, because remember, whenever you're running nmap and you're running nmap as root, its default scanning profile is running that scanning profile as SYN scan. That means nmap is going to make raw TCP/IP socket access, and it's going to send the SYN packet bypassing the TCP connect function on the computer system. So it's just a SYN scan. So it doesn't trip the honeyport at all. And by the way, if you're playing along with me, if I do pwd, I am in the root directory. It is not in ADHD's home directory. Okay. So it's just in the root directory. So here we have this wonderful little connection that I can run again and again and again, and it doesn't work. I can even spoof the IP address, and it's not going to work. It's just not, okay? So it's not going to trip it. It's not going to lock the system out. However, if I actually change my scan to a full connect scan using this system, how many times am I going to walk during this talk? I walk all the time. Now we actually want to do a full connect scan. Notice it worked the first time. But then immediately my honeyport script basically pops up and it says 127.0.0.1 has been blocked, which is generally bad. You don't want to block your own system. But now if I try to scan the system again, it's now filtered. So now if I actually take off the port, we'll just do the standard Nmap scan again against the system, it's taking a much longer time because literally none of the ports are responding. So now it's actually blocked from that particular connection. So, all right. So it's going to take forever for it to actually come through. So now if I control C out of that, do IP tables minus F, we're going to flush the IP tables. Now if I run Nmap again, you're going to be able to see that port is open again. So this allows you to create that simple rule right off the bat and do it in such a way that it's going to keep your system relatively safe from somebody spoofing an IP address. So let's talk about relatively safe. And I'm gonna have Bill Stearns, if he's on mic, he can come and he can fact check me. So whenever you start a SYN scan, all right, you send a SYN packet. I'm going to ask questions to the Discord channel. If I send you a SYN packet, I'm going to send you an initial sequence number. How many bits is an initial sequence number, folks? We got to have some people here that are going to nail this. I noticed that Discord is a little bit behind, or at least my video and everything is a little bit behind. So here we go. People are coming up. It's just how many bits is it? It's 32 bits, right? So Hirsch got it. So it's a 32-bit field. Now, what happens is if that port is, you can't do spoofing on a full TCP connect scan, anti, and I'm going to talk about that here in a second. So it's 32 bits, okay? Now, somebody brought up the question, what if they're spoofing a full connection scan? I said they can't, but I got an asterisk after that, okay? So I've got an asterisk after that, all right? And let me come back to that. So if I want to spoof a SYN scan, it's very easy for me to do. I can change my IP address to the SYN packet and away it goes. But if I send you a SYN packet to an open port, West Coast 1, folks, West Coast 1. And I'm going to come back to that story here in a second. So if I send you a packet to that port and it's a SYN packet, you're going to respond back with a SYN ACK, all right? So you're going to respond back with a SYN ACK. And that means you're going to respond back to my initial sequence number by incrementing it by 1. So that's a 32-bit randomized number. And then you're going to establish a brand new initial sequence number. All right. So you're going to acknowledge my sequence number, and then you're going to start a new sequence number that is going to be a new random and completely unique and separate sequence number from the one that you sent to me. Yeah, maybe if you're on the same network, you could ARP cache poison first. But if we're doing this remotely across the internet, you can't do ARP cache poisoning because you're not going to be able to see that layer 2 traffic. So what happens is that's a brand new initial sequence number. And if you want to spoof a full TCP connection, you have to start with a spoofed IP address and an initial sequence number. That's easy. But then you have to guess what the acknowledged sequence number is to be able to respond back and acknowledge that sequence number. And that is not trivial, okay? This was done years ago, not Dan Kaminsky. Kevin Mitnick did this against Satomu Shimomura. He was able to pull it off, but there was a couple of things. One, he was on the same network. He was able to gain access to the systems. He was able to do a denial of service attack against the system he was spoofing. He had an extended period of time to launch the attack, and he was attacking a TCP IP stack that had weak sequence number prediction. So the point is, with all of this, you really can't easily spoof a full connect attack, right? And your risk of this breaking your system is about the same level of risk that you would run into for any TCP connection that's out there, not just this one. So Bill, did I sum that up right? Or is there something else that you would like me to add to that? By the way, Bill is one of the first instructors I got to know years ago, and he's one of the smartest TCP/IP people that I know, hands down.
I've learned from some of the best myself, John. Now that sounds good.
All right, fantastic. I want to make sure that I got that right. So we have that little script that'll actually block that traffic for you, and I can just kill it now. The other tool that we have that you can use that actually makes this a lot easier is a tool called honeyports. Now, this was actually written by Paul Azadorian. Whenever him and I were working on this class years ago, he actually set up the script, which I thought was pretty cool. So if we cd into opt honeyports, and then we go into cross-platform, and then we go into honeyports, or we'll just say honeyports platform. And we go into honeyports, type ls. Going through the instructions, you can actually run the honeyport script as a just straight Python script. We're going to do which one were we doing here? 4A, there we go. And we have to specify a port, and I'll just do 2222 as I'm not creative. And it automatically creates that honeyport script as well. So you can just simply make a connection to it. It makes a connection to that specific port. It says, thank you for connecting, and now it's blocked it. So you have two ways to actually do this relatively easily in your environment. And if I print the rules, that actually will show me the specific rule that I have right here. I have reject any and all traffic from 127.0.0.1. And if I try to remake that connection again, it's just, I'm going to get nothing. It just doesn't work. I can't connect. That gives me nothing. So back to the story. So my friend set up the bash version of this on their environment and a bunch of their Linux computer systems. So they set it up on a whole bunch of Linux computer systems across the entire environment. And in doing so, the pen tester showed up and then they ran their scans. Now we have a number of people here that that are offensive in nature, very, 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 very offensive in nature. But what happened was, as a pen tester, if you scan a network and then that network stops responding, what's your first thought? Let's see what happens on Discord. So if you scan a network and then the entire network stops scanning, what's your first thought? This is really kind of a weird acid test to tell if people see if people actually do offensive testing as well. Somebody's trying to read TCP/IP illustrated. It's dry. I don't think so. It makes you kind of nervous, right? It doesn't mean you're blocked. That's actually not the first thing that you're going to jump into. You can always tell the people that have done pen testing. If they've done pen testing, their answer is I've blocked it or I've crashed the network. Very rarely do you ever have somebody say, well, we're blocked here. That's what the problem is. The immediate first reaction, if you've been doing this for a long time, is that you brought the entire network down. And that's what the testers did. So they went to my friend who was the customer and they said, hey, this network seems a bit wonky. Is everything okay? My friend said, oh, nope, everything's fine. Network's working great. Testers are like, oh, okay, and I'm going away. It took them about half a day to find out what exactly was going on. And they went into the customer, my friend in this situation, and they said, we demand that you remove these firewall rules from all of your computer systems. And my friend said, great. I will remove these firewall rules under the request that every single reporting finding that you find from this point on documents clearly that the only way you were able to find the vulnerabilities is because we had to reduce the security of our environment. And of course, the pen testing firm said yes. And of course, the pen testing term didn't put that anywhere in the first draft of the report, because this is back in the days where a whole bunch of pen testing companies, but basically, it was all about proving that they were elite hackers, right? So really, really easy trick that you can run in your environment that'll actually make life completely miserable for anybody that's trying to attack systems on your environment. Now, you have to be careful. You don't want to set up honeyports on systems that you don't want to set it up on a port that's already in use. You also want to make sure that you create exceptions for your vulnerability scanning software and things like that. So there are exceptions which you're going to want to do for this, but this will, without question, drive an attacker completely and utterly insane. So this is very, very, very cool. Also, you're starting to see a lot of vendor products that actually have this capability built into them as well. I know some Fortinet firewalls, somebody was talking about some Cisco shun rules. Fortinet does it. I think Palo Alto has some deception that you can put into it as well, where the system will just stop responding to you. And yeah, it just makes things very, very, very difficult. So that is one quick little lab. Now that we've completely messed with the local system, I usually just restart the system. Just simply power down and restart the system, because we have another lab coming up with different honeypots here in just a few minutes that we're going to be going to as well. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. So one of the questions that I saw pop up a little while ago that I thought was a great one was somebody said, can't they just spoof their IP address and try again? You could actually do that again and again and again, but Andrea brought up a tester won't see the results. The other thing is, a lot of these things sound very easy. Well, the IP address can just rotate through with the attacker. They'll just change it all the time. Great. Let's go back to the formula, right? Let's go back to the formula. Detection time, reaction time must be less than the amount of time it takes to attack an organization. If you're working on a situation where you're now forcing the attacker to constantly rotate all of their IP addresses all of the time for literally everything they do, that changes the attacker's tactics considerably, and it also increases the amount of time. Now, there are specific tools that we have written that do things similar to that. One of those tools is by You Stay Ready, who left BHIS and is now at CrowdStrike. It's Fireprox that actually allows you to rotate through your IP addresses. So you can do something like that. But once again, if you're rotating all of the IP addresses, it'll work for some things like password spraying attacks. But if they actually want to use this, they actually have to create an account in Amazon. And Amazon's a little bit more of a stickler. But yes, there are ways that you can absolutely do that, but it does take more time